Hello, my name's Julian Gee. I'm a former director of cycling time trials and I'm currently chairman of Sotonia CC, one of the largest cycling clubs in the south. I wanted to make a contribution to the debate about the progress or lack of it of UK domestic cycle sport and throw in a couple of suggestions to the mix in advance of the meeting which is going to take place at the end of November. Now, I want to take you back to the 1970s when I got involved in the sport and think about the club structure then. At that time, most of cycling clubs were based in a town or city. Big city might have had several clubs, and most of the clubs, or a lot of the clubs, would have promoted their events and club members rallied round, and that's essentially how the racing calendar was formed. But if you move on through the 70s and 80s and up until today, you've got a lot more small specialist clubs or racing teams that don't really have the numbers of people or indeed the ethos or the capabilities of organising their own events. So increasingly the load has fallen on older established clubs to set up the race calendar. And there are increasingly fewer of those, and that's one of the big problems that we have today. So I've got a couple of suggestions which I feel may help going forward to reinvigorate the domestic racing scene, and that's really all to do with reform of the club structure and incentivising clubs and teams to get involved in the organisational side of the sport. Let's look at the club structure and affiliations to the main cycling bodies, that's Cycling Time Trials and British Cycling. At the moment there's not much difference between a organisation or club that promotes and one that doesn't. The affiliation fee is pretty much the same in any circumstance. So I was thinking, wouldn't it be a good idea to incentivise those clubs that put a lot back into the sport and organise the races which generate the income for British Cycling and Cycling Time Trials? The way that it would work with this, you'd have essentially two types of organisation. You would have premier clubs and secondary clubs. Premier clubs would be the ones that organise and put on the events, whether that be time trials, open or club time trials, road races, track events, cyclocross, whatever. Because those are the clubs that are generating the income through the levies they raise for their events. The secondary clubs will be the non-promoting clubs, and that would be reflected in the subscription fees that both organisations join. So premier clubs would pay little or nothing to become affiliated because they would be generating levy income through the races they organise. Whereas secondary clubs who don't promote events have to pay a larger affiliation fee to reflect the fact that's the only contribution they are making to the sport. And I think this mix may be a good thing to look into, because then it has an incentive for secondary clubs who currently don't promote to promote. So that's one side of things. I think that reorganisation of affiliation could make a big difference and makes it clear to clubs and teams the value that they bring or could bring to the sport. I think the second thing to look at is we spend in the sport a lot of time recognising the results of our champions. However, there is very little recognition of those people who provide the events that the sport runs on. So what I'm suggesting is that we set up an award scheme to recognise contribution to organisation of the sport. It could be an award ceremony, big thing once a year, where we have categories for the best organising club, the best promoters, the best individual race organiser, the best event. All of these things would be recognised on an annual basis to incentivise and recognise the people who put the most back into the sport. So I think these two things together, the change of affiliation plus the recognition of the contribution that organising clubs make to the sport could together make a fundamental difference to the way that domestic cycle racing is organised in the UK. Just some ideas, but I'd be really interested to see what others think and see if there's anything that could be advanced through the necessary channels at CTT and British Cycling. Look forward to hearing your views. Thanks.